John McCordy Archer was elected Justice of the Peace in Hutchinson County. His wife, Nancy, steadfastly made the men attending the trials to dump their handguns in a wooden tub. One day, when his youngest son, Branch T. Archer, was old enough, he got the job of collecting the guns at the door. That day, they tried a horse thief. The jury consisted of all the ranchers from several miles around. All the men came in and were seated around John M.'s dining room table, including the judge and the accused. John M. introduced the defendant to all the other men and asked him, "Did you steal such and such a horse?" The thief quickly confessed, throwing himself on the mercy of the court. The defendant's transparency was touching, but he was just as quickly found guilty. There was no jail in Hutchinson County, so Judge Archer, probably expecting leniency, gave the jury the choice to either let the man go or hang him. So they took the man out and put him on a horse and hung him from a nearby tree. The whole process took less than 2 hours. John M. asked Branch T. what he thought he had learned from this experience. His reply was, "I learned not to steal." And then to himself he said, "And if you do, for God's sake, don't admit it." The Archers were always horse poor. When times got hard, Judge Archer would gather up a bunch of horses and send 2 or 3 of his boys out to trade. When asked what they were going for, he would merely respond, "I don't care what you trade for, just don't bring these same horses back." The boys soon learned to trade with the Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians on their reservation in Indian Territory, who often had superior horses provided by the U.S. government. But it was illegal for anyone to acquire U.S. government property, and the Indian mounts were routinely branded with a huge government brand. The Native Americans learned to hide their better colts and keep the government from branding them, and then quickly sold or traded them to horse traders like the Archers. It was frontier horse laundering and helped improve the McCordy stock considerably. Of course, no horse trade was complete without some racing and gambling. This was one thing the cowboys and Indians always agreed on. The Archer boys were expert riders and also knew how to tip the scales in their favor. They would line up a race between their champion and any Indian pony, no matter how fast. They planned ahead of time to put the race through a couple of fouls or false starts, knowing the Indian pony would take off like a rocket each time and nearly run the whole race before he could be stopped. Roy Coleman Archer explained, "Ben weighed the least, and he was usually the rider. He was instructed by his brothers to pull up his horse just before he got to the starting line, so that the Indian pony crossed the line several yards ahead. Roy would then call out foul, and both riders would have to restart. By the 3rd start, the Indian pony would more often than not be exhausted. The Archer horse, still fresh, would have a good chance to win. The race would be run with satisfactory results, and then they would gather up their winnings and hit the trail before the Indians figured out what had just transpired." Thinking the boys were merely superior traders, it was a long time before Judge Archer figured out what the Archer boys had been doing. The whole family was a tribe of incessant teasers. Walter, just 5'3", the runt of the litter, often pretending to be discontent, always threatened that he was going to go and buy a cotton sack and return to picking cotton. But he could just never quite find one big enough or one strong enough. And Walter also mischievously bragged he had a way to save his beloved rabbit dogs from having to run those half-starved West Texas rabbits to death just to catch them. "I have Emma," that was his wife. "She runs alongside of them and feels their ribs, and she decides that they are fat enough to stick the dogs on them." Emma must have been quite a runner. In fact, the Archer women were just as bad as the men. Martha Ann was the oldest of the girls and had all of her grandchildren mesmerized and convinced she had a cork leg, that she stood it in the corner at night, that when she undressed she put her wig on the dresser next to her false teeth and her glass eye, that one time her wig and her hat blew off in the wind, and when she bent over to retrieve them, her cork leg turned around, and she had accidentally put her hat on backwards. When she straightened up, she became confused. In fact, could not tell whether she was coming or going. But perhaps the craziest Archer prank was a joint effort. Dan and Jim wrote to a Dallas newspaper columnist called Mr. Big Hat, searching for correspondence with girls, and using their brother Sam's name. Sam knew nothing about it. Soon a young woman answered his request, and after months of considerable exchanges of letters and photographs back and forth, they planned to be engaged. A date was even set. Then Dan and Jim wrote the girl and explained that Sam had unfortunately broken his leg. The girl was understanding, and the date of the union was set again, giving his leg appropriate time to heal. Then the two wrote again for postponement, explaining that Sam's horse had broken his leg. Finally, the unlucky lass got it, and that was the end of Sam's distant romance. Years later, as the grandchildren remembered the Archer clan, they always mentioned their sense of humor. Every one of them was known to cope with life's trouble with a heavy dose of laughter. That is an amazing legacy, considering the hardships they endured, living in a prairie dugout, nursing cattle in relentless freezing blizzards, and there were crippling burns from that fireplace, hopeless nights tormented with fever alone on the trail, near drownings at river crossings. But humor was not their only weapon against suffering and depression. There was a certain internal spirit, a tradition of self-reliance. The name Archer was very appropriate. The Archers represented a millennium of westward migration of Scotch-Irish peoples, who, according to Robert the Bruce, originated near the Black Sea on the steppes of Russia in ancient times. They were inherently nomads, horse people, who were archers, experts with a bow and arrow, warlike tribes who finally settled on the British Isles at the ends of the earth, or so they thought. Wherever they went, they took their love of archery, horses, adventure, inventiveness, and those mischievous smiles with them. They never wanted anything but to be free, to match their wits with nature, and be able to ride in every direction, as far as they could see. And there was a third weapon, one discovered by the Scots while still in Scotland: education. It was the Scots who reinvented their country and their culture by single-handedly initiating a literacy campaign which turned them into one of the most progressive nations on earth. Although he lacked much education, John McWatty Archer encouraged his clan to get educated, to even be educators. They listened to him, and the results were impressive. The Panhandle of frontier Texas was an incubator for frontier problem solvers. John Archer's 21 children yielded 175 grandchildren, and the Archer clan produced leading craftsmen and innovators who served all across Texas as blacksmiths, stonemasons, judges, shepherds, doctors, merchants, lawyers, school teachers, writers, and lawmen, and yes, even some cowboys and cotton farmers, all performing with honor and perseverance. It turns out that hardship, true hardship, is the very best preparation for success in life. Struggle, danger, even deprivation are the mother of intelligence, invention, and independence. The conditioning of the American West either brought out the best or the worst in an individual, and for that matter, a whole family. When it brought out the worst, there was no hesitation to rub out the undesirable, to protect the innocent, and preserve the peace. It may have been brutal, but it was a self-policing system that worked, and the best of America could grow and prosper. And that system eventually tamed the American West. Americans today still look back at those times with nostalgia and a little wonder at what we did, who we were, and what we have lost along the way.